Good afternoon and welcome to the Scottish Oceans Institute's seminar series. First of all, for those listening online, because we have quite a few attendees online, we're asking that if you have any questions at the end of the session, can you please direct them via email, and we'll put Cati's email address up so you can direct them questions towards her at that point. But I'd like to welcome you all and introduce Cati Torres, who since 2011 has been an associate professor of environmental economics at the Applied Economics Department of the University of the Balearic Islands. She's also a coordinator of the UNESCO San Nostro Chair for Business Management and Environment. And Cati's been here on a MASTS visiting fellowship scheme. And she's been collaborating with the Environmental Economics Research Units, both in the Division of Economics at the University of Stirling and also the Department of Geography and Sustainable Development here at University of St Andrews. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce her, and Cati's going to tell us a little bit about her research since she's been here on the MASTS Visiting Fellowship Scheme. So over to Cati.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, so thanks a lot. So first of all, I would really like to thank you for having given me the opportunity to present the work I've been precisely doing during the last 5 months with Nick Hanley under this Visiting Research Fellowship. So the work is a report entitled Valuation of Coastal and Marine Ecosystem Services in the 21st Century, an overview from a management perspective. So I'm going to try to present it to you in about 45-50 minutes, more or less. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to explain to you a bit about which is the context of this report. So we are going to talk about why this report, and then we will understand a bit better which is the goal of this work we've been doing, followed by a little explanation about the methodology we have used to undertake or to achieve the goal. And for what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a bit about the main outcomes and policy implications, and finally we will talk a bit about, well, what do we really learn from this work. So why this report? Well, we all know that coastal and marine ecosystem services, coastal and marine ecosystems provide important services to society. But at the same time, we know that these ecosystems face high environmental pressures. We are expected to be intensified by global warming. So in this context, there is a need for local and national strategies and also for international cooperation. So the EU water policy can serve as a basis for developing such strategies, the needed policies. So we know that it gives guidance on the protection of surface and groundwaters as well as of the marine environment. In those terms, the European Union has developed a series of directives which well, one of the most important ones is the Water Framework Directive, which establishes that the best way to achieve a good ecological status of waters for the waters of the member states is undertaking integrated river basin management. So this directive is complemented by other regulations aimed at regulating specific water uses, and also is complemented by laws that try to extend the scope of integrated water management. So in this context, economic valuation, environmental cost-benefit analysis can provide useful information for policymakers about the social benefits and cost of alternative management practices. So this way it allows evaluating the social profitability of different alternative options. So economic valuation can allow prioritizing policies on the basis of welfare maximization issues, therefore can contribute to make the decision-making process much more efficient. So this is of a special relevance in a context in which environmental policies increasingly call for balancing of benefits and costs of regulations. So having talked a bit about the motivation, which is the goal of this report? Well, the goal is to provide a comprehensive overview of the current knowledge database regarding the valuation of coastal and marine ecosystem services by putting special emphasis on the analysis of both the policy implications and of the current studies and the existing challenges. So what we want to do is we want to contribute to the role of economic valuation in the management of these ecosystems, but also, especially, we want to promote discussion among social and ecological or researchers about further research needs. So in other words, what we want to do is to build a common language, to promote to build a common language among or between both disciplines. Social and ecological sciences. So which is the methodology we have been using in this report? How do we achieve the goal? Well, first, as a primary information source, we have been using the National Ocean Economics Program database, and the criteria we have followed to select the papers are those ones. So we have focused just on peer-reviewed papers published between 2000 and 2015, using any evaluation methodology, being original or undertaking meta-analysis, estimating any type of non-use value, valuing any type of relevant natural capital asset, and also focusing on any type of recreational activity. So from this first review, we have been able to identify two types of journals where these papers have been published. The first type of journals are journals interested in publishing work related to both ecological and management issues in a coastal and marine setting. So in total, we have identified 22 journals. I'm sure that you are very familiar with some of the journals. So 22, but we realized that the database we used didn't display some papers published in the last years for some of the journals. So we also, it's here, we also added we access those journals directly to complete the review until 2015. And finally, what we do is we identify, we identify the second type of journals, which are journals much more related or interested in publishing work related to a specific natural resource and environmental issues involving for the development of valuation methods and their novel applications to new data sets. And from these journals, which are 7 journals now, yes, these journals, what we realize is that some of the journals didn't publish, or the database didn't display the papers published in the last years for some of the journals, so we accessed the journals directly to complete the review. And also, we also did an additional task, which was to include these 3 journals which we also find interested in within this journal category. So we accessed these 3 journals again directly, and we added all the papers identified, all the papers focusing on valuation of coastal and marine ecosystem services to our database list. So this is in total how we proceed with the review of the papers. I can tell that most of the papers reviewed are papers focusing on valuing services provided by coastal and marine ecosystems. So normally methodological papers are not included here unless we consider they were interested in terms of policy implications in coastal and marine settings. So to better contribute to the role of economic valuation to decision making, and to better contribute to build the bridge between social and ecological sciences, we classified the papers into 8 ecosystem categories. So how did we decide about these categories? Well, according to the major management concerns among valuation researchers, and also taking into account the classification of aquatic ecosystems made by the WFD. So the categories we identified or we have been using here are wetlands, beaches, coastal areas, inland and transitional waters, and coastal waters. So these 5 categories involve the coastal ecosystems. Then what we did is to add 3 more categories: coral reefs, deep sea and open ocean, and marine protected areas involving the marine ecosystems. But we also added a 9th category, which we call coastal and marine ecosystems, which includes the papers valuing services provided by more than one of the before mentioned ecosystem categories, or papers that just refer to value services provided by coastal and marine ecosystems in general. So which are the issues of interest? What have we been analyzing from each of the papers? So we have we have examined the study object of the paper, the ecosystem service being valued, the specific ecosystem service, plus the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment category to which this ecosystem service belongs to. We have also examined the type of values being estimated, providing information about the estimation technique. Also, we have examined the main outcomes, monetary outcomes from the papers, and we report information about the year the monetary values referred to. And we also report in a table, this information is reported in the table, we report the main policy implications from these studies, reviewed studies. But from each paper, we also analyze the main research needs stated by the authors, as well as the main policy challenges. So a couple of notes. I'm aware that most of you are not economists, so the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report is a report which classifies the services provided by ecosystems into 4 categories. These 4 categories on the screen. So first, provisioning services. Ecosystems can provide provisioning services. That refers to products obtained from the ecosystem. Regulating services are the benefits obtained from regulation functions of ecosystems. Cultural services are just non-material benefits obtained from the ecosystems. And finally, we have the supporting services, which are intermediate ecosystem services acting as inputs to the production of these 3 final ecosystem services. So some more notes about these categories. Well, tell you that most of the papers consider or just value services provided by the final ecosystem services. This is reasonable because valuing supporting services is quite complicated, because it's difficult to determine if individuals are really expressing value for biodiversity or supporting services. So most of the papers consider the 3 final ecosystem services, and when the papers don't indicate which type of ecosystem service they value, we infer this information from the information provided about the study object, the specific ecosystem service, the technique used, and the sample. So some more notes about the total economic value attached to an ecosystem. Well, normally economists, what we do is we divide this value into 2 broad categories, use and non-use value. The use value at the same time is divided into current use and future use, and the current use can be divided into direct use and indirect use. So the type of values we get from these 2 broad categories are a consumptive and a non-consumptive direct use value. Consumptive normally attached to provision services, non-consumptive normally attached to cultural services. What we get from the indirect use of the ecosystems is an indirect use value, which is normally attached to regulating and supporting services. On the other side, well, if we take a look to the future use, we can get an option value. This is the value of having the possibility of using the resource in the future. So that's the option value, and normally most of times is attached to cultural services, but some of the times can also be attached, as demonstrated by some studies, to provisioning services. Then what we have here is the non-use value. And non-use value means, well, I'm not a user of the resource, but I'm still interested in protecting the resource. Why? Because I have non-use value motivations. I can be interested in protecting the resource because I think the resource has right to exist, right? Or I can be interested in protecting the resource, assign a non-use value because I'm happy. I want the future generations being able to enjoy the resource. This is why I can assign a bequest value, and then I can estimate a bequest value. Or I have a non-use value because I'm happy that other people can also make use of the resource. Okay, so that would be an altruistic value. But the motivations can be a lot, okay? So non-use values are normally assigned to cultural services, but can also be attached to regulating, provisioning, and biodiversity. Why supporting here? Well, because of the link between non-use values and biodiversity habitat issues, some researchers assign non-use value to supporting services, okay? Though the majority of researchers assign an indirect use value, okay? So Some more notes on the values. Not all the papers that review indicate the type of value they estimate. So what we do is, to decide if they estimate non-use values, we take into consideration simultaneously two criteria. First, have the authors used a stated preference method? Why? Because stated preference methods are the only ones allowing you for estimation of non-use values. And second, we try to observe, we examine if the authors have been valuing some biodiversity habitat issue. Imagine a choice experiment. Is there a habitat attribute being valued or not? Or we also examine if the follow-up questions or analysis of the study give some indication or show that the willingness to pay has also been driven by non-use value motivations. So according to that, then we can decide if the paper estimate or have estimated non-use values. So some notes on the outcomes, the monetary outcomes, just to tell you that the tables that are reported in the report, in the study, just show a couple of monetary values, not all of them. So we really recommend to the persons interested in the values that they access the paper directly to see exactly all the types of values that have been estimated, as well as the technique that has been used. And also we report in parentheses the currencies. But if the papers don't indicate the currencies of these money values, what we do is we report in parentheses the year or the time period of the data collection for stated preference and rebel preference studies, but hedonic analysis. This rebel preference study, together with direct market approaches, for those papers using these techniques, what we report is the information about the years which the data used have been published. So this is an example of you can find in the report. This is all the information we report for each paper. So study object, a specific service, ecosystem service being value, in that case commercial fisheries, that belongs to the provision, is the provisioning service, type of values, they estimate option and existence values through a contingent valuation method, here a couple of monetary values. And finally, we report main policy implications stated by the authors in that context. So what do we get from this report? Well, first, we have reviewed 196 papers. So you can observe here all the papers and the main areas. You can observe that the highest number of papers have been centered on valuing services provided by beaches, right? Followed by coastal waters, marine protected areas, and wetlands. Okay, so if we analyze this table or this diagram by each type of journals, you will observe that 155 papers have been published in the first type of journals, ecological management issues in coastal and marine settings, right? And you observe also that the highest, where those papers, in which type of ecosystems these papers have been mostly focused. Well, again, we said that it's wetlands, beaches, coastal areas, and MPAs. If we take a look to the second type 2 journals, we will observe that we found 41 papers, and the areas, the ecosystem categories being capturing major attention among researchers have been mostly the same, with this exception. So this type of researchers or journals seem to be they have been publishing more papers in inland and transitional waters than in MPAs, for instance, right? So if we go to journal by journal, we observe that there are some journals publishing a high number of papers here. We have ecological economics, where you can find many papers focusing on wetlands and MPAs. You find marine resource economics with coastal waters and beaches, and so on. Beaches, here we have the ocean and coastal management and marine policy. If we go to the second type of journals, we observe that it's a lower number of papers, and 2 journals can be observed that have been publishing the highest number of papers, right? Environmental and resource economics, you will find mostly papers focused on wetlands and beaches, and then land economics also focuses on inland and transitional waters compared to the other type of journals. So What we observe then is that there has been an interest in contributing to the management of specific ecosystem categories, those ones, beaches, coastal waters, MPAs, and wetlands, but we can also say that the interest in contributing to reef management hasn't been negligible, because we have a coral reefs category, but if we observe the papers focusing on MPAs, we will see that almost half of them have been focusing on coastal and protected coral reefs areas, okay? So, well, if we go to the coastal ecosystems context, we will see that unlike wetland valuation, the interest in contributing to beach management and management of other coastal habitats has been especially increasing or high during the last years. And same publication pattern for papers provided by inland and transitional waters. Almost half of them published during the last 5 years, but we expect that if economic valuation is going to play a role in integrated river basin management, the number of papers publishing this style of centering on value and services provided by these waters is going to increase. It's going to increase, okay, in the next years. So in the context of marine ecosystems, well, we see that the interest in value and services provided by them has also been growing during, well, over the last 16 years. And here, the marine ecosystems, and this is especially true for papers focusing on services provided by deep sea. This is reasonable because likely due to the lack of unfamiliarity of most of people with this ecosystem services, right? And therefore the difficulty for the evaluation. So interestingly, it's worth noting that there is a considerable number of papers that have been valuing coastal and marine ecosystem services in a developing country context, especially papers focusing on wetlands, coral reefs, and MPAs. The methods, well, very few papers have been applying meta-analysis on and/or using benefit transfer approaches, especially in the context of wetlands. But I'm just talking about 6 papers. We have just identified 6 papers in the context of wetlands centering or applying meta-analysis. And these meta-analysis studies are very, very recent, right? All the type of approaches or methodologies that have been applied in this context is, well, direct market approaches, especially to estimate indirect and direct use values attached to regulating and provisioning services, respectively. Remote preference methods, travel cost, hedonic analysis to estimate non-consumptive direct use values attached normally to cultural services, and stated preference methods, contingent evaluation, choice experiment. To estimate what? Well, first to estimate direct use values attached to provisioning and cultural services, but also to estimate non-use values, okay, attached to regulating, provisioning, cultural and biodiversity issues, okay. Also stated preference methods to estimate indirect use values assigned to supporting services. And again, also the stated preference methods have to be used if we want to estimate option values, the value of future resource usage. So we can say about the ecosystem services that mainly of the papers have been valuing cultural services. This is especially true for papers focusing on beaches and other coastal areas, inland and transitional waters, coastal waters, coral reefs and MPAs, with special emphasis on the recreational opportunities these ecosystems can offer to society. Exceptions are papers focusing on wetland valuation and on deep services valuation, which have been mostly focused on those focusing on wetlands, then have been focused on regulating and provisioning services. Those centering on deep sea services have been valuing, provisioning, and supporting services. Why? Well, wetlands are especially valued by their regulating services, and in a developing country context, they represent an important source of life for many local communities. So in this context, we have observed that nitrogen mitigation and coastal protection and stabilization have been the main regulating services, those capturing major attention among researchers. And regarding the provisioning services, fisheries and direct use of mangroves forest resources by local communities are the ones being valued in a higher number of papers. So regarding the deep sea services, well, you know that the direct links between the deep sea services and the benefits to society have only been successfully shown to date for the fishing sector. That makes provisioning service, especially fisheries, an interesting object of valuation. And at the same time, normally the deep sea biodiversity is being attributed a high economic importance. That's why supporting services is also an interesting service, being interesting in terms of valuation, right? The two papers we have identified, we have reviewed and classified within this category really focus one on provisioning service, the other one on the role of cold water coral as a habitat for fish and other marine organisms. That's a supporting service. So regarding the values, we observe that most of papers estimate direct use values, especially non-consumptive direct use values. Very few papers estimate option values, especially in the context of MPAs, some in that context, inland and transitional waters. Many papers also estimate non-use values, especially in those contexts, almost all of them. And we see that most, the type of non-use values have been especially existent ambiguous values, but we can also find examples, many examples in fact, valuing cultural and cognitive values as well as altruistic values. So regarding the outcomes, well, main outcomes, high recreational benefits have been or are associated with coastal and marine ecosystems, and we have found, though, it can be said that there is a positive correlation between these benefits and the environmental quality. So resource users normally attach a mix of use and non-use values to the services provided by coastal and marine ecosystems. But we find also, valuation researchers find that non-users also assign a very high positive willingness to pay for protection of these ecosystems. So in general, we can say that important non-use values are attached to coastal and marine ecosystem services, especially to cultural services and biodiversity. So let's go to the policy implications. Well, first thing to say is that the high recreational benefits and the positive correlation between those benefits and environmental quality can provide an economic justification for conservation policies. This is of special relevance in nature-based tourism destinations where the recreational opportunities offered by these ecosystems are at the core of their tourism product. But the economic justification can be even sounder if the non-use values users and non-users assigned to cultural services and the biodiversity are also taken into account. So there are many management settings that can greatly benefit from the information contained in willingness to pay estimates. Here are some examples. Design on MPAs and marine conservation zone networks, erosion prevention and land conservation programs, biodiversity preservation strategies, maritime and fishing heritage conservation plans, fisheries management, natural resource damage assessment or assessment of energy development projects, beach nourishment projects, wetland mitigation strategies, etc., etc., etc. But economic valuation can also contribute to tourism planning processes to make them much more efficient. And also, it can contribute not only to examine the appropriateness of charging visitors to help finance coastal and marine policies, but even it can also contribute to design the proper user fee or tourist tax. And it's very important to say that the role of economic valuation is especially relevant in a context in which both the member states are required to follow the guidelines set by the EU water policy and also the environmental policies, and as I said earlier, increasingly call for balancing of costs and benefits. So in these terms, valuation can also plays a role in the implementation of many European directives. Here, the example. So it can contribute to the implementation of the Water Framework Directive by showing the benefits of achieving good ecological status for the waters. Then we can contribute to this. or by showing the high value of wetlands, we can also contribute to this WFD. Why? Because wetlands are viewed as a cost-effective measures to improve water quality in a river basin management setting. Okay, it can contribute also to the implementation of Bathing Waters Directive, the Marine Spatial Framework Directive, or the Marine Spatial Planning Directive. But economic valuation can also make an important contribution in a developing country context because, for instance, studies showing changes in the distribution of income from marine ecosystem services as management changes or environmental pressures are exerted on the system, especially in terms of the share accruing to poor communities, can demonstrate the role of sustainable development, sustainable management of marine ecosystems in achieving poverty reduction goals. But it can also show the importance of cultural values in comparison to other direct and indirect use ecosystem services, suggesting that management actions that entail short-term sacrifices to improve ecological conditions may be more acceptable to the local community than previous research can suggest, for instance. So because values can really help to ensure the long-term ecological and sociocultural sustainability as well as improve livelihoods. But economic valuation in a developing country context can also give guidance in many cases on whether local communities should continue with damaging extractive resource uses, or in contrast should pursue their protection through different conservation practices. But economic valuation can also help to design compensation mechanisms, for instance, payment for ecosystem services for the local communities to better contribute to a more sustainable management of coastal and marine ecosystems. Or even can motivate locals to attract nature-based tourists as a way to capture greater benefits from the management of their local resources. And finally, in this context, economic valuation can also increase the awareness of the value of local resources, and this is especially important for the sustainability of these ecosystems. So those are the main policy implications. What do we learn from this work? Well, we learn that both in a developing and developed country context, valuation information can facilitate the transition towards a more ecosystem-based management by both providing an economic justification of conservation policies as well as a decision-making framework for prioritizing management actions. However, despite this, for valuation to really or to better contribute to the sustainable management of coastal and marine settings, some further research work is needed, right? So first, we have identified a couple important for the research needs. So first, estimation of non-use values. Due to their multidimensionality and their high importance, we need more valuation studies focusing on estimating non-use values. Second, undertaking more primary and high-quality valuation studies can help to raise the possibilities of using better benefit transfer approaches and hence better respond to the growing political demand of ecosystem service values. So we have seen that very few studies apply meta-analysis. So a larger sample would increase the accuracy and the applicability of meta-analysis, and this would improve the reliability of welfare estimates. And future meta-analysis should also include relevant socioeconomic information and especially especially defined context variables to better represent the determinants of the values, right? So if we work on these areas, benefit transfer approaches, we can increase the accuracy of the prediction of values based on previous studies. And this is of special relevance for valuation researchers because benefit transfer and also for policymakers, because benefit transfer can allow overcoming problems of too little time or too little budget to perform original studies. And this is of particular interest in a context in which we have very tight time schedules imposed by the WFD to develop those integrated river basin management plans. So the third further research needs, we need to work in interdisciplinary we need to take into account the interdisciplinary cooperation across countries, not only across researchers within the same country. Because if researchers cooperate by providing more precise and comparable descriptions of the valuation scenarios, that can greatly benefit meta-analysis. But also, if researchers cooperate by replicating the studies about EU-wide environmental damages, this can enhance the role of economic valuation in the management of these specific problems. And even it can even serve as an incentive for institutional innovations in the EU governance based on the design of supranational common environmental policies aimed at enabling environmental damage claims. So fourth, and very important too, we need interdisciplinary work with natural scientists, so with you, right? That's important because that can help to model the specific threats faced by coastal and marine ecosystems, as well as provide information about biophysical factors, which is really essential to identify areas of protection in efficient conservation planning. But interdisciplinary work can also increase the ecological understanding of the co-provision or conflicting provision of ecosystem services, and this is essential to understand how these services are generated by biophysical functions and processes. But this collaboration can also give information about existing environmental uncertainties over the future impacts. And this is essential to examine how uncertainty information can affect the values for coastal and marine ecosystem protection. But this work can also contribute consequently to the better measurement of the values associated with multiple interdependent services provided by these ecosystems. And it can also help economists refine their methods to reflect the ecological reality of any valuation scenario in the context precisely of this interdependency, and it can give knowledge about the ecological consequences of biodiversity loss. So that can help to increase the understanding about the welfare implications of the biodiversity loss. But another contribution is that ecological knowledge can also increase the public awareness regarding the benefits of biodiversity and deep sea protection. But it's worth noting too that economic analysis can also contribute to the conservation science, right? By giving evidence of the social demand for biodiversity protection, and in turn, which in turn, reinforces scientific support for conservation. And also, economic analysis can help to identify pressures on the marine environment by highlighting areas of high levels of activity on sensitive environments if we integrate human patterns of activities with existing ecological knowledge. So we can say that this work between economists and natural scientists is critical to adopt this integrated natural and social science approach, which is essential not only to ensure the sustainability of coastal and marine ecosystems, but also to increase the acceptance among the scientific community of the role of economic valuation in decision making. So it's necessary to examine the possibilities of valuation to complement rather than substitute more participatory approaches. So environmental cost-benefit analysis highlights the nature of benefits and costs accruing to different groups, but it has still been challenged in terms of concerns around rights, fairness, and the need for stakeholder engagement and deliberation. Environmental cost-benefit analysis provides a valuable framework for interpreting biophysical findings of environmental impact assessments in economic welfare terms, but its single criterion approach falls short when significant environmental and social impacts cannot be assigned a monetary value. And on the other side, public participation, which is crucial to ensure sustainability of ecosystems, is beyond the scope of valuation. In fact, participatory approaches are valuable contributions, we know that, to the success of implementation of policies due to the involvement of the stakeholders. So, for instance, the European legislation requires the member states to maker to implement strategies following the principles underlying integrated coastal zone management. So in this context, if we examine this potential evaluation to complement these more participatory approaches, we can increase the validity of the methods as well as its influence in decision making. And 6, we need to modify the design and procedure of valuations to better suit the context of community relationships and kinship in a developing country setting. We know that many local communities might be unfamiliar for paying for the resource usage. That's why, right? So we have lots of further research needs. Details can be found in the report. Those are the main further research needs we have identified. And despite this, we also recognize that there are still some challenges for the method, right? So in those terms, 3 main challenges. First, understanding and conserving marine biodiversity. That's one of the the biggest challenges for the European policy in the next decades. Second, the lack of information and knowledge regarding the benefits of deep sea protection. And third, and in a developing country context, the lack of data and expert opinion, the low scientific understanding and education, the lack of funding, and the lack of trust toward institutions. So network research and outreach and education campaigns, together with the major participation of governments, especially in a developing country context, that can help to overcome those challenges. So we can say that cooperation across the different actors involved in the management of coastal and marine ecosystems is a key issue to both increase the use and influence of valuation in decision making and to overcome the major economic valuation challenges. But even more, cooperation beyond enhancing the role of valuation in decision making should be driven by the need to give a voice to all the actors involved in the process to make coastal and marine ecosystem governance much more democratic. So we can conclude what have we learned from here. We can conclude that cooperation and collaboration, together with poverty elimination and legal recognition of rights of many local communities, are essential, should be of high priority for the scientific community if sustainability of coastal and marine ecosystems is really the issue. So hopefully, well, this report can shed some light on identifying areas for further collaborative action. So, thank you.